But without further ado, let's bring on our first guest, and Jim Mosquera. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me on.
All right, my pleasure. All right, Jim, you've got an interesting way of looking at the world. I wanted to open that up. Bring your background into the show, and then let's talk about the different things that you had in mind about talking about today.
Academically, I have a couple of degrees in industrial engineering. Professionally, I'd spent most of my career working for a large telecommunications technology company in a middle management capacity. Have throughout my life been keenly interested in those things related to finance and economics, so I kind of developed a lot of knowledge and practice on the side with that during my professional career. About 4 years ago, I started a small consultancy using some of the knowledge I acquired in the financial and economic markets to help small businesses navigate the labyrinth of some of the financial challenges that any small to mid-sized businesses face.
Okay. Now, you wanted to talk about, well, first off, give us the name of your new book.
My new book that you're referring to is called Escaping Oz, An Observer's Reflections, which is the third in the Escaping Oz series.
All right, and I assume Amazon or any other place?
Yes, sir. And if I could add, that book the latest book is available in print form, ebook form, and audio form.
Okay. All right. Now, Jim, an economy or functioning society only needs 5 things. What are they?
So what I did in this book is I just kind of started from scratch, and I said, well, if you were just creating an economy, you would have goods, you would have services, you would have the most important economic invention in history, which is money, and you would need civil laws, and you would need criminal laws. So those are the 5 things. And really that's all a society essentially needs to function. And I would submit that we probably had just those things for most of recorded, let's say, economic history. As we move closer to modern economic history, you certainly had more of the latter, where you had the imposition of civil and economic laws. And one of the theses in the book, Michael, is that we've kind of drifted away from those things that are just like purely necessary to have in a society, and we've gotten more of some other things.
All right. What about asking government too much? Are we asking government to do much to do too much now?
Yeah, we are, and probably the biggest financial marker for that is our funded government debt, which sits at $20+ trillion. And again, that doesn't include, of course, the unfunded liabilities. And that's really a reflection of asking government to do more beyond those 5 things that I just mentioned. Again, and I try to make the book as elementary as possible so people can just see and understand the fundamentals. And as we ask government to do more, we get more laws, rules, and regulations, which, if you look at the U.S. tax code, that's probably, exemplifies, what happens when you ask government to do a lot. And, of course, you have people that are in powerful positions that can influence what goes into the tax code. And people that are in the middle certainly don't have that same influence over the creation and obviously the modification of the tax code. And, of course, that's a very hotly debated topic in Washington today.
Absolutely. All right. We're moving into a world where cryptocurrencies are becoming more the norm than they ever have in the past. So what's wrong with abolishing cash?
The reason I talked about how important cash was, and there's several reasons for that, but once we move to an entirely, let's take cryptocurrencies just out of the equation for just 1 second. If we're just talking about cash today, money today, most of the money today exists in cyberspace, so it is basically an electronic currency. All of that lessens our economic privacy, because if essentially any transaction that occurs electronically through digital cash is something that can be tracked. Now, some would argue, well, those that are playing in that space are only seeking to hide their transactions because they're performing something that's unlawful, and that's certainly part of the case. But I would also submit to you, and especially people that are in your state of Texas, that there's a lot of people that value their privacy, and so if you eliminate cash, you eliminate one element of privacy. The other thing that's very, very important nowadays is that what happens with a lot of cyber thievery that occurs is, you might be the victim of some sort of a cyber mayhem event that could completely compromise your credit. It could compromise your ability to access digital cash. And so then what happens? Well, you may be stuck. And so one of the best protection measures that you could have as an individual is to have cash in the event you are hacked at some point in time and you don't have access to your credit cards or you don't have access to credit. What if the ATM network goes down, because of, some cyber attack or some electronic attack of some sort? Cash is always a good thing to have.
Right. What about your outlook on our political spectrum? Let's start that. I mean, we've got about 4 minutes left, and that's going to give us some time to open that one up.
In 2016, we had something that I had kind of forecast when I wrote my first book in 2010, which was, let's say an unquieted populace, if you will, unquieted voters that began first to protest, as we saw in the Tea Party demonstrations of 2009, the spring of. And I mentioned at the time that the Tea Party would not necessarily coalesce as a political third party, but it was important and instructive to understand why they came about. After that, we had the Occupy fill-in-the-blank protest. And that really kind of set to me an undertone of rancor, if you will, within the United States that really came home to roost in the 2016 election. And typically when you have situations like that where you have an unquieted voter base, it typically will refer back to some sort of an economic foundational problem, which I talk about in my second book, Escaping Oz, Navigating the Crisis. We had an economic crisis in 2008, 2009, and I argue very strongly that we never really escaped that. And what you're seeing now is a manifestation of that because, obviously, measures of income inequality, you have some very, very odd things that are going on in the markets. I noticed you're going to interview a guest later who's going to talk about Tesla, who recently sold 5% bonds with no covenants, and it's burning, obviously, through a lot of cash and isn't producing the cars that they were supposed to. So a lot of odd things are happening. I'll add another one there, something I call fallen heroes. Fallen heroes are people that were formerly like in the pantheon of their respective fields. We recently had Harvey Weinstein, we had Kevin Spacey, and there will be others. And that's because the social mood at the time kind of excused certain types of behavior. But as the population becomes more and more angry, and again, think about that economic undertone that I mentioned, those things will no longer be tolerated, and so you'll see more of those things come about and exposed.
Okay, I see that in the future. We've got about a minute left. Big items that you see coming to the forefront on your perspective.
A lot of debt issues, Michael. We have global debt that's 300+% of GDP. We've got other debt conditions that exist, at the state level, which affect pensions, at the federal level, which maybe stayed a little bit longer. But when those financial cones, as I like to describe them, when they start to unravel, then you have a debt deflationary process that, again, could usher in even more political, let's say, rancor than you saw in 2016. And I suspect you will see significantly more in 2020.
So all the hymns are going to come to roost on debt as we go through this peaking period with the economy and the stock market, which has been running it for quite a long time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, at some point the debt bubble craters. We know that historically that's happened. This is the biggest debt bubble in recorded history. And again, if you get more into my book, you'll see why cyclically it makes sense why this is the biggest debt bubble and kind of what happens and how it unravels afterwards.
Got it. We've got to run, but thank you so much for your time, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
You're welcome. Jim Mosquera, escapingoz.com, jimmosquera.com. Up next, on the other side of this break, we're going to come back with Ed Baxter, Bison Creek Capital. We're going to talk about the private equity spotlight. We'll be right back on the other side of this break. Segment brought to you by Tycon Partners.